Welcome back to the Outfitters podcast. This is the second episode. Today we're going to talk a little bit about leadership, and this is the second time I'm recording this. The other night I did a full-on podcast for episode 2 and was like, listened back to it. I was like, this is freaking terrible. This is absolutely freaking terrible, man. Do I need to even continue to keep doing this? But here we are, back again. Episode 2, we're going to try to give this another shot and kind of see where it goes. So we're going to talk about leadership today. That was one of the things I ended on in episode 1 was talk a little bit about leadership today. But before we get to leadership, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of local things that are going on that are near and dear and important to a lot of us. Should be important to a lot of outdoors folks. It's the Nelson Knowles Stewardship Program that we've got going on here in Wisconsin. The program launched in 1989, and it has protected over 750,000 acres of land and invested 1.3 billion in natural resources. It's a pretty big deal here in Wisconsin. It's been in the news a lot for some time, basically because the funding in the program is due to run out here in June of 2026, and it's been probably one of the single most important revenue streams for a lot of parks and different programs to be funded. Trails, boat launches throughout the state of Wisconsin, all sorts of different things that people and organizations are relying on to ensure that we can access recreational areas throughout the state of Wisconsin. A lot of conservation efforts as well. And so what I wanted to bring this up in the podcast for was that if you haven't heard of it, the Knowles Nelson Stewardship, look it up, Google it. That's what I've done. I got it up on my computer here, Google it just so I can speak intelligently to it. And I encourage you all out there, if you're listening to this and you have and just curious what it is and what it's really done for the state of Wisconsin, to look it up and see what you can see what you think about it. But again, I think that what we'll find out is that it's a super important program that's been going on now for quite a few years. 89, like I said, is the inaugural year that it was put into place, and it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that that is put up every year to help with a lot of the outdoor again, areas that we like to recreate and gain access to and stuff too. So again, the program is set to expire here in June of 2026. Right now, the debates are going on regarding reauthorization with proposals to include varying funding levels and changes to oversight, such as a 6-year renewal at the $72 million per proposed, and this is proposed by Democrats in late 2025. So it's a bipartisan bill that we're trying to get passed, and I know some local state representation is working really hard to get people to call into their representatives to say, hey, this is something that's important to us. As outdoors folks, we need you guys to look at to renew this bill. A lot of nonprofit organizations rely on this money too to do all the good things that they do, and normally most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of nonprofits are run by volunteers as well too. So people are volunteering their time to go out and to keep up on a lot of the recreational areas, trails, like I said, trails, boat landings, streams, a lot of different things that we all enjoy here in the state of Wisconsin. That if funding goes away, it's gonna take away a lot of those activities. And even if they're volunteer organizations, it still requires money for a lot of those things to for a lot of those things to happen. Tools, you still gotta, volunteers. I know a lot of volunteer organizations, they still try to feed their workers, of course, that they're out there working on all day. So there's still money that it takes to, putting wood chips down or gravel down, or, obviously if you're talking a boat launch, there's things that go along with that. There's multiple different things that money goes towards to continue to provide these accessibility areas for the public to outdoor recreate. So I wanted to bring that up. Again, it's a hot topic. It's set to expire in June. That's awfully close. Here we are. We're sitting at the end of February, and so yeah, I encourage you to reach out to your local state and your local representation to let them know how important this bill needs to be passed and it needs to be renewed. Whether it's the 6 years that's already proposed or longer would be fantastic. But again, 1,500 grants yearly are usually approved with this money, and like all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin are affected by this. So it's a really, really big deal. And again, I wanted to bring it to your attention just so that if you never heard of it before, you have now. But a couple other notes real quick. So this is the time of the year where a lot of these, speaking of nonprofits, this is the time of the year where a lot of the nonprofit organizations throughout the state of Wisconsin are holding their banquets. It's a good time of the year. Obviously, we had really good weather a couple weeks ago. It was in the 50s down here, and I think it was in southern Wisconsin. It was in the 60s, which is seriously unheard of here in the Midwest. And we'll take it. It's just another indication, though, that things are jacked up in the ecosystem a little bit. But we're back to our normal selves again. We got some snow last week, got some more snow yesterday, and temperatures are right back where they need to be, which is cold, really cold. But anyways, it's a good time for these nonprofits to hold their annual banquets, and these annual banquets not only do they recognize volunteers for all the work they did in the year previously, but it's also a great way for them to raise money for a lot of the projects that they have ahead of themselves here for 2026. So I know there's a couple of them that I'm going to be making it to. There was a few that I've made it to already this year. Obviously with our store being a fly fishing shop, we try to support and build relationships with our local trout unlimiteds. I've taken it as far as forging relationships with other trout unlimiteds throughout the state of Wisconsin, because obviously people recreate not only here in the central part, but they're going all over the place. They're going to southeastern, they're going to the eastern part, the western part, and a lot of the different outdoor stores and fly shops. I know that they realize that obviously there's a correlation, right? Fly shop, people that are angling, they're going to get their goods from the fly shop. We need conservation, we need cold water conservation to continue to happen, so that not only can our small businesses continue to thrive, but it's obviously good for the fish species, all the others, the bugs, the ecosystem that's on these rivers, but it's also obviously also good for the outdoor industry and for overall just the stream health quality and all those things. And a lot of times I think there's this misconception that, well, the hunters and the anglers are the ones that ruin it. Well, I think that's the actual opposite, in my personal opinion. I think the hunters and the anglers are the ones that are out beating feet on the ground. They're wading in the streams. They're the ones that are identifying some of the issues. They're the ones that are picking up trash that's left by, unfortunately, other anglers or other people that are recreating on these bodies of water. And if we don't get access to streams, we don't have access to hunting property or hunting land to do those things, I think we would drastically see a lot of the quality of these locations decrease. And so again, I put this plug in there to if you've never attended one of these banquets before, some of them are really good, like Whitetail Unlimited banquets, Ducks Unlimited banquets. BHA, Bow Hunters and Anglers, is another really, really big organization here. They have a university here in the Stevens Point area, university BHA chapter, Ducks Unlimited University chapter, which I think is great. These colleges have these wonderful outdoor chapters, and they're doing local conservation with that, and it allows them to go to higher levels to advocate for some of these things here in the central part in the state of Wisconsin. So again, what I'm getting at here is I'm advocating for you to attend these banquets if you can, buy some raffle tickets. A lot of these banquets have amazing prizes for sure. I know we try to donate to as many of these banquets that we can to help with those fundraising efforts, not only monetarily, but again, we try to donate equipment and different things to support them. And so my plug is, look on the socials and find out where a banquet near you may be, where you can go and support. And they're a good time too. It's a great camaraderie builder. Some of these Trout Unlimiteds are now doing film fests, so you get to talk a little bit, maybe indulge in a spirit before the film kicks off, and then everybody's sitting in a movie theater and watching some amazing fly fishing videos. So it's a really good time as well. So yeah, there's my plug for that too. So we're already killing it. We're already killing it this morning on this podcast. It's just crazy, killing it. It's much better than the last. It's much better than the last one I recorded. It was all over the map. I was like, what in the heck are we doing? We're all over the map. Of course, like anybody, like any good person that wants to try to make a go at a podcast, I did my research, right? I got a whole bunch of notes written down here, and I don't think it'd be fair if I sat here and read everything verbatim, right? That's like going to That's like when you go to listen to somebody talk and they have a PowerPoint. And like I like photos, like I think a lot of us do. Like I like to kind of like vision like when somebody's talking if they have photos to go along with their speech. But there's also been times where I think we've all gone to these talks and these speeches before too, where people just talk right off the PowerPoint and you're like, I could have just Googled this stuff. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But I do need some of this stuff to guide me on my conversation pieces, right? And one of those in particular we're going to talk about today that's near and dear to me. And I think it has a lot to do with small business. It has a lot to do with just a lot of things in life, right? It could be a lot of things in life. It doesn't have to be small business. I know you hear me talk about it all the time. And again, probably like, man, enough of that. Enough of the small business stuff. I get it. But I'm not on here to listen to that. I want to talk about leadership a little bit, right? I think that's a topic that comes up. I think that leadership is the word that people think about a lot, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in the news today where people question leadership, or some people are like this, strong leadership. I will tell you right now, people can get upset with me all they want. I am not going to bring politics into this. The only time that you're going to hear me talk about politics is that like conservation stuff, right? Because again, that's in line of everything that I do for a living, and the things that I like to do, and people that I surround myself with, is to get out and recreate and having access to a lot of things. So when it comes to conservation, and when we're talking about saving, like right now, there's another thing going on with the boundary waters, right? Where, we need resources to live. That's debatable, right? But it's debatable for some people that say we don't need some of these technology things that we have going on. And I would agree, but it always seems like our technology needs and the mineral needs are starting to impede on public access lands in areas that have been preserved for many, many time. And I'm going to talk about an individual here shortly that I look up to, an historical figure that has a lot to do with conservation. But I think leadership, but that's where you're gonna hear me talk about politics, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm not gonna go down the rabbit hole of all the other stuff that's going on in the world. There's political podcasts that people can listen to. They're not coming out here to listen to that with me. I'm just some dumb idiot who's just trying to talk about issues with locally and maybe statewide. And that's when you're going to hear me talk a little bit about the political side of things, as far as get out and vote, make your voice heard when it comes to some of these things that we're adamant about, right? Adamant that we need to continue to save and have a voice to help preserve our natural resources. So I'm going to read you the definition of leadership. I'm going to put it up right here on the screen too, so that you get, again, that visual, right? Visual, read it. You're listening to me talk, get the visual. Leadership is the ability to influence, inspire, and guide individuals or teams towards achieving a common goal, often by fostering collaboration, motivation, and positive change. It is a set of behaviors, not just a title, focused on setting direction, building trust, and unlocking team potential to navigate challenges. I think that's the end of the podcast. It sums up right there. But no, there's a lot of good stuff out of that, right? And I've kind of taken different pieces out of that. And, I don't know, like I said, I think there are people that are born leaders, right? There are people, I don't know what it is. I don't know if I had the gene or not. I think a lot of where I've learned my leadership is confidence building, right? Of like not talking about being a leader, but doing it, right? And I think that's how you craft who you are as leader, is by just doing sometimes, instead of just acting or saying, well, I've done this or I've done that, or, doing it. The act of doing something puts you into that position of leadership. I think people that volunteer to coach, right? They're leaders. Some are great and some are not that great. But what I will tell you is, like you can't, some of that you can teach, but some of it you can't. Some of it are just born with natural leadership qualities and capabilities. Some people are revered. Some people are looked up to by the way they carry themselves. I think that's the other thing too, is like, how does somebody carry themselves, right? Do they, like who I'm going to talk about, Teddy Roosevelt. I'm going to talk a little bit about him. Speak softly, carry a big stick type of thing, right? He was a very boisterous individual, but he didn't have to go around and like talk the talk, right? He walked the walk, as they say. And I think a lot of a leadership is that, like, how do you carry yourself? What kind of persona do you put off? You know, um, I've been around a lot of great leaders in my military time frame. I would tell you that, like, it's the best. I think sometimes some of the leadership that I've been around in my military time frame is some of the best I've ever seen in my life. People that have risen to occasions, that didn't really truly know what they were capable of until they were put into a position where they had to kind of show or prove, like, that they're able to handle the immense pressure that's put on them. And that's not even in a wartime or a combat situation either. Sometimes in training situations, sometimes doing the right thing in a hard situation. That could be in a meeting. That could be in a lot of different things. I mean, so I've truly think I've been around a lot of really, really great leaders. I've learned a lot from being around those individuals as well. Whether they know that or not, they were infectious by the way they carried themselves. And I do think, like, one of the things I used to always say all the time is that, like, when you lead people, if you're not bought into the idea of a subject or a topic, I think it's awfully hard to lead other individuals to believe in that same mission, right? People are, I mean, this sounds dumb to say this, kind of dumb to say it, but people are super smart, right? Sometimes there's people that you're like, I don't know, man. I don't know if he really understands or gets what's going on here, but I've realized that, you need to definitely give people the benefit of the doubt, because, like, they can tell you, they know if you're feeding them full of, crap, right? If you're trying to sell them on something that, blatantly is not it's not going to work, or it's not going to motivate them to do it, they can see right through it. So you got to believe, as a leader, you got to believe in what you're doing and what you're trying to get people motivated to do. So I think, aspiring to achieve a common goal, right? We did a lot of that in the military. I told a story. I don't talk a lot about my military time. There's a whole mash of reasons why I don't talk about it. Quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people really care. Maybe they do, but that's just my personal opinion. So I feel like, why waste my time talking about it if people were like, I think I've been around too many people where I've started to talk about it, and then all of a sudden I get cut off, or I get told, like, well, I had to do this as well too. So it kind of cancels it out. And it's like, well, if every time I talk about this stuff, it's just gonna get canceled out. I'll just keep it inside. But I was telling somebody a story the other day. It was another military guy that I served with, and we were talking about when I was in the Navy for 4 years. Yeah, big shocker, right? If you didn't know that about me, I always talk about being in the Army. I did 4 years in the Navy. I worked on F-18 fighter jets. Some of you have heard that before. Pretty cool, right? My dad was a private pilot. I always liked being around aircraft. So when I joined the Navy, I thought, man, I want to be around aviation. Well, inevitably, if you join the Navy and if you think you're not going to get on a ship, it's the Navy, right? I mean, so, like, don't be shocked when you're shipboard and you're sailing, even if you're in aviation. There's some people, I know some people that have never been on a ship before that were in the Navy. You know who you are. You're lucky. But the majority of us are going to end up being on an well, in this case for aviation, obviously an aircraft carrier. But the story I was telling them is that, I had been in the Navy for about 3 years. I had a 4-year contract. I was just a little over 3 years. We were out, I think we were doing sea trials, getting ready for a workup. We were doing a workup, getting ready for a deployment. And I can remember at the time, so 3 years, 18, so I was 20 years old. 20 years old, I had just gotten promoted, and I was in charge of a crew of, I think there were 6 or 7 of us. And our job was, we worked in night ops on the aircraft carrier. So for those of you that don't know, which this is going to make sense, when you're out doing sea trials on an aircraft carrier, you're out. As soon as that ship leaves port, you're in simulated combat mode where you got to be stealthy. You can't, the carrier's not out at night with all the lights on, right? You don't have all the floodlights on so that your position gets taken away. So when the carrier is out at night, it's the whole carrier is dark. The only lights that are lighting up the carrier flight deck is going to be red lights or different colored lights depending on what your job is, right? So red lights meant ordnance. So if you saw red lights on the carrier deck, it meant generally there's some kind of ordnance going on, bombs, guns. Yellow lights, yellow flashlights, there's going to be more flight ops, so people that are launching aircraft. And so there's other colors on there, but most of the time it's going to be you're going to use a red light in certain circumstances. That's what a lot of military people use at night. The red light, for some reason, it helps with the eyes. to see. But I can remember being out there, 20 years old, I'm in charge of a crew of 6 to 7 people, and our job is we're running flight ops. So we've got F-18s going out off the pointy end of the aircraft carrier, going out on mission, and then coming back. And then my job is to go and work with officers and high enlisted people on the aircraft carrier flight operations to make sure that when our aircraft come back on the carrier, they're positioned in an area where I can, on an F-18, a lot of aircraft in the Navy that are shipboard have folding wings, right? So you can fit multiple aircraft, right? So the wings go out during flight operations. Obviously, they don't fold them when they're flying, but when they come back, the wings go back out. Or when they come back in after they land, the wings fold in so that they can pack all these aircraft on the carrier. So my job was to go, I had a little notebook here, and I had what aircraft were out on flight missions, and our call sign was Hobo. Yep, this is the name of we were the Hobo. That was our call sign, was Hobo. So it was Hobo. We were the 400 series, so 400, 410. Aircraft 410's coming in, and I need it parked on the elbow, or I need it parked on the waist somewhere, so I can do a hot wing, or I can do a hot wing download, which basically meant we're going to put sidewinder missiles on this on the end of the wing of the aircraft, and I need this parked somewhere where the airplane is either pushed forward or pushed back, where I can bring the wing down, where I can load AIM-9 sidewinder missiles on it. Anyways, what I'm going with this is that here I am, 20 years old, in the middle of the ocean, Pacific Ocean, and I'm in charge of making these decisions and leading a crew and communicating, and I had a microphone, and I'm talking to our flight ops, I'm talking to the ship flight ops, I'm walking in there and making these decisions. We're putting ordnance on these wings. In the meantime, the whole time we're doing this, the flight ops don't shut down, right? So you got constant aircraft going and landing the whole time. Constant cyclic air operations. I think I'm saying that right, where aircraft are constantly taking off the catapults and they're landing. So taking off, landing simultaneously going on. So you've got it's like I think it's one of the top 5 dangerous jobs in the world, apparently, right? Well, you're 20 years old, you don't realize that. You're just like focused in on this and that and the other thing. And it's super dangerous, right? If anybody who's listening to this ever has been on an aircraft carrier during flight operations, like, I'm not trying to overstate it here. It's crazy. It's crazy madness. But of course, you're focused in on what's going on. So I'm leading these people and I'm making these decisions. And I can remember it was like 2:00 in the morning and these aircraft are coming in. At the time, we had F-18 Cs. I think we had F-18 Cs. Doesn't really matter. For those listening, you're probably like, what's a C? Who cares? It's a different model of the F-18, and then we still had F-14 Tomcats. So F-14s are the same airplanes that were on Top Gun. Those things come whistling in. They were awesome to watch those things fly. And where we're loading this aircraft, in the back part of the aircraft carrier, the foul line is the line that you don't cross when these airplanes are coming in, because that's where you're going to get killed, and that's where the catch wire is. These airplanes are literally landing 10 feet from the F-18 that we're loading this ordnance on. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what in the hell am I doing here? Like, this is absolutely freaking nuts. Like, if people that knew me back home, like, knew what I was doing right now, they'd be like, are you serious? Like, this is all ultra freaking dangerous, But 20 years old, right? 20 years old, and I worked my way up in 3 years in that squadron to lead. There was women too. We had women in our ordnance office and guys, and it would a huge responsibility, right? So you want to talk about learning how to be a leader? There's no manual, right? You just learn it on the job. OJT, baby, learning on the job, figuring out what you need to do, watching people above you teach you the right way and the wrong way how to do things, and then you have to formulate how or what kind of leader you're going to be in those certain circumstances, and making the right decision to keep people safe, right? And there have been people who have crossed that fall line and been killed. There have been people that have not crossed that fall line, and when that airplane lands, the wire that catches the tail hook on those airplanes snaps, and that wire comes through and cuts people in half. That is an absolute known fact. That does happen. It's uber dangerous. I can remember a time being on the carrier, not to go down this military storytelling time, where one of the, I think it was an F-14, was getting ready to load on the catapult, and it turned, and one of the guys in the back that wasn't paying attention literally got picked up like a rag doll from the jet blast. And the F-14 He had to stand on it a little bit to turn it, because you got to remember that deck of that aircraft carrier is ever slowly pitching back and forth, right? So if you imagine that aircraft carrier deck pitching back, that F-14 has got to make a turn to get onto a catapult. He's going to have to gun it a little bit. He gunned it coming around the corner to get on a catapult, and this guy gets picked up like a rag doll and chucked 30 yards in the air and lands. He's a pretty crazy dude anyway, so I think he got up and cheered. That's just how some of these folks that I've served with in the military are. But I mean, there's been people that have been thrown, off the aircraft carrier into the ocean. So my point is uber dangerous, right? But kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit. But my point is that like you're kind of getting thrown into the crucible here with as far as leadership when it comes to some of those types of things. Obviously, leading a business, maybe not quite as dangerous. I think it's dangerous in other aspects, but my point is that like you got leadership trial by fire, and then you've got leadership by trying to convince people to achieve a common goal, right? And that's kind of where I've been in 8 years of the business of trying to figure out like how can I navigate this, and it's difficult. I think I tell people all this all the time, not to continue. Unfortunately, I apologize to you guys. Owning a small business is it's very consuming, so I talk a lot about it. But one of the big things that I would say is that like it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. I talk about my time on the aircraft carrier, and that was just one instance. There was multiple times there's stories for days. Then I got 18 more years of 2 combat tours to the Middle East. That's a whole other set of storytelling and conversations as well. Not saying I'm a hero, not like I did special operations stuff on those things, but stories and stress nevertheless. So there's stories for days. Again, I don't talk a whole lot about it, but I think in this case, talking about leadership, but running a small business, there's been time, and maybe because it's newer, been retired for 8 years, it's newer. I think that's some of that stress involved that I deal with now. Maybe it seems like it's more consuming and it's more difficult because it's the thing that's happening now. But some of those challenges is like when things aren't going well as a leader, how do you make the team feel like things are fine, right? And again, people are smart. They can see what's going on. But I think part of that leadership trait is being consistent across the board. Yes, there's going to be peaks and there's going to be valleys, right, with your way that your attitude is as a leader. But I think being consistent is a big part of that, right? How can you consistently, for the most part, because you're a human being, how can you try to consistently be straight across the board when it comes to how you act? A couple other things on here too. Influence and action. It's a process of social influence and maximizing the efforts of others, right? I think that's the other thing too, right? Is that being a leader, you identify when there's some shortcomings going on with people. Like you're like, hey, like Bill's been a fantastic performer for a long time, and all of a sudden I'm starting to see things dip a little bit, right? So there's a little bit, depending on the situation, right? I always say this, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. Hey man, there's no reason for us to stress out. No one's dying here, right? My prior life, that was definitely a possibility, but here, we're running a small business. Nobody's dying here. We'll get through it. Not a big deal. There's room for some errors here. But when Bill's production stuff starts to slip, you got to keep an eye on that as a leader. When it continues to slide from the norm, I think being a good leader is identifying, hey, something's wrong on with Bill here. Let's pull him aside and talk to him. Let's find out what's going on, right? Don't assume that because Bill's performance went down that he's just a crappy employee at this point, especially when Bill's been a pretty consistent employee up to that point. And I've had many conversations with some of my employees, right? When you're around people long enough, you get to learn. If you're a good judge of character, you really care about the people that you lead, you get to know them. And I think that's another part of leadership that you have to be uber careful with too, depending on what you lead, is how close do you get to those individuals that you lead too, because that also can get skewed as well, where then when you got to drop the hammer on stuff or you got to make tough decisions, and I thought we were friends. Craig, I thought we were friends. You're an ass. I can't believe that you're talking to me like this or you're treating me like this. Yeah, I screwed up. I thought we were friends. So you got to be careful with that one too. That one I've had to learn the hard way on multiple occasions because I think sometimes I care too much. And then when that doesn't go the right way, then you're super let down, and then that gets spiraled off into a whole other topic. But pulling people aside and just being human beings to one another and be like, hey, Bill, everything going okay? Kind of notice that just seem a little off, right? And most of the time, and this is just my opinion, this is just my experience, most of the time, because you're talking to them like another human being and you're being respectful in that conversation, you're going to find out what the true reason is, right? And who knows what it is? It could be a multitude of different things. I've learned throughout the years. I've had I don't know. I've always been an attractor for people to come and talk to me about their problems. And a lot of times I'm not asking, they're just coming to me and venting to me about different things. And most of the time what I found out is that, if you're just an active listener, which means you're just not speaking, injecting once in a while, they'll tell you what's going on. And hopefully you can find out what's going on with Bill and correct the situation or help them and give him some grace to kind of get him back on the straight and narrow path, right? So again, these are just things that I've picked out and learned. You may be listening to this going, yeah, I know that. Yep, I know that. Yep, okay, this guy's not really telling me anything new. I'm not telling you that I'm going to learn. I'm going to teach you on this podcast how to split an atom here. But I am telling you that these are just some of the things that are near and dear and important to me. And again, this is going to sound harsh, but I think it's the truth. Not all people are leaders. Even ones that think they are. And that's okay. You need you need the worker bees too. You need the people that work hard. You need the ones that are going to be able to follow. You need good followers. I think that's what I'm trying to say is you need good followers. Not everybody's going to be a leader. Some people can be taught to be leaders. I've seen that before too. Whether it's schooling, education, people can change. People can grow up. They can mature. They can become excellent leaders, right? Situations, putting people in dire situations or putting people in situations where now they have to make the hard decision, that can make them become leaders. But not everybody's a leader. And some people think they are, but they're not. And I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I've learned an immense amount of things from leaders that are terrible, terrible leaders. And maybe there's people out there that say, well, I didn't think you're that great of a leader either. And I learned a lot about how not to be like you. Maybe. I've never heard that personally, but maybe. But I've learned more from people that are terrible leaders. Or I've learned a lot from people that are terrible leaders too, because it's like, well, just because you were a certain rank or you have a certain title, I guess that gives you the leader, that makes you a leader, but people aren't going to follow you, right? And I think to be a good leader, you also have to be a good follower, right? Unless you're the top dog, right? Unless you're the general, right? You're the 4-star who doesn't have to, and you're still answering to somebody, the Secretary of Defense or War, or whatever we're calling it today in age, or whatever, as that ladder goes up, you're still always answering to somebody. You own a company, yeah, you may not have a ton of people to answer to, but I will tell you that you still are accountable to the people that you lead. So you're still answering to people, even if you're the CEO of a major company, you're still answering people. Some of these publicly traded companies, there's a board. You're still answering to the board as a CEO. And there's been a lot of people as CEOs have gotten relieved from the board. So you're still answering to people, even though you may think you're the top dog and you're the biggest earner in the company. So you got to be a good follower too. But I've learned a lot from people that are not very good either. I think we all have, right? One of the persons I want to touch on, and again, I try not to make these podcasts super, super long because again, I think attention spans for people are like, no, it's good stuff he's saying, but like, especially in my first episode 1, right? I'm like, I listened to that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm all over the map here. People are still listening to this. I appreciate it because I was like all over the map on stuff. But one of the people I wanted to talk to a little bit too, and this person's been in a public eye for many, many years. Obviously, has been president since the late 1800s. But he's got a ton of credit to a lot of credit to him. He's responsible for a lot of conservation, and a lot of national parks wouldn't be around here if it wasn't for Theodore Roosevelt, right? 26th president of the United States. Super interesting guy to me. I think one of the things that I've taken away from reading about Theodore Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, and listening to documentaries is that like the guy never sat still. And I think the other bigger thing too that I took out of it is that it sounds like to me that he was a really good dad. He really cared a lot about his kids. I think, these are different times. I had a conversation with somebody the other day and we were talking about like mental capacity, right? How much can one individual take? I'm like, man, it seems to me that people were able to just take more mentally, early 1900s, late 1800s. And then I was reminded by this individual that, I don't think so. I think human is a human, and the evolution of human beings obviously has continued to progress, and technology has a big part of that. But, I think that as we continue to grow as a human being and in society, you know, things change, and I think that things are obviously clearly more acceptable. I think people were wired the same way they are today. But I just, for some reason, he just to me seemed like he was just differently wired than a lot of different people. 26th president of the United States, grew up in a family that, you know, was doing pretty well for themselves. You know, I would definitely say that they were influential. It was an influential family. They were pretty well off for the most part, you know. So did he have a leg up? Yeah, absolutely. I think especially when you talk about the 1800s, anybody that had a decent amount of money, and we're talking like New York City type area for him, and the East Coast type of area, you know, like, yeah, they're a little more affluent, where they had a little bit of a leg up, and he did. But what to his credit, what he decided to do at a young age is he decided he wanted to go west. He wanted to figure some things out for himself. He decides he wants to go west. He ends up settling in North Dakota and working on a ranch, learning how to ride horse and like how to, you know, drive cattle, and like kind of like being a cowboy, right? I mean, goes from this affluent family over here in New York, and then decides he's going to go west. And at that time, New York to North Dakota, I mean, for us that live in the Midwest, North Dakota is not that far from here. To us, I think the West is like South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, all that kind of stuff, even further. But he decides as a young age he's gonna go out west to North Dakota, and he's gonna live the ranching lifestyle for a couple years. And he attributes a lot of what he learned, and his love for the West and the natural roaming areas of the West, due to that time when he was younger. And then as time evolves, he decides that he's going to, you know, move back to the New York area in 1895. You know, as some time goes by in 1895, he becomes the New York City Police Commissioner, and he's like the first guy as a leader for that commission, or for the police department, where he's not afraid to tell people no. He decides to let a lot of people go. So it's like people were like, "Who's this guy? Who's this guy coming in here?" Usually there's a lot, you know, like you kind of have your cronies, right? Where you get elected, or you get into a group of people, and this is back in the day. I've never been in politics. I don't want to be in politics. Where people are, Jim, you know, hey, how you doing, Bill? You know, I don't know why I'm using the word Bill so much, but anyways, and you kind of just was the status quo, and you didn't ruffle any feathers, and he did the opposite. He was ruffling feathers. In fact, they were saying that back in the day when he was this police commissioner, that he used to go out at night, in the middle of the night, and he would walk around and check on police officers to make sure that they were doing the right thing. The unfortunate thing for him was that he usually had like reporters following him in night, so it was pretty easy to pick up on who was walking around. But just stuff like that, right? Being a leader, right? Lead from the front, go out at night, see how these police officers are how they're behaving themselves, how professional they are. This is like I said, this is 1895, right? 1895, 1896. Then he decides he's going to join the military during the Spanish-American War, and he's very, very well known for his time spent with the Rough Riders. San Juan Hill is another area that kind of brings his lore to public light. But he decides that he's going to lead his troopers. They called them troopers back in the day, up this battle for Kettle Hill. And it's one of the first times that it's publicly annotated that it's an open field engagement, right? So I know in the Revolutionary War, we would have phalanxes where soldiers would line up in a row, and then they would fire. They wouldn't take cover or anything, and they would fire, and then they would take a knee, and then the line behind them would fire, and the other line was reloading. That's called a phalanx, and that was a lot of how the battles used to take place in the Revolutionary War. But in the Civil War, they had a lot of this as well. But for this particular one, it was an open area. They were going up. They were trying to take this Kettle Hill, and the men were like, "We ain't doing this. We're not. Are you kidding me? There's no protection here. Like, we've seen this played out before, right? From the previous battles and previous engagements in our very early history of a country." So TR, what he decides to do is he's going to get up on a horse, and he's going to lead the charge on horseback. Now, he's the only one on horseback, so you can imagine like how much he sticks out like a sore thumb to the enemy as he's riding around. And he inspires his guys enough as a leader that they get motivated where they start following him, and they go across this open area, and eventually his horse ends up getting wounded, and now he's on foot. And so I've seen leaders do this before. Take the hill, and then they're back behind while you run forward, or you're going up the hill and they're not. Some of that is for a reason, radio communications, whatever. We won't go down that path, but so he ends up proceeding to still lead his men on this charge up Kettle Hill, off his horse, and it just inspires his men even more. And at the end, it's the rest is history, as they say, and it just continues to build on this historical figure of Theodore Roosevelt, right? He, ends up getting elected as president, and does a lot of really good things as a president, and to include, he's got some really, really cool key conservation accomplishments from 1901 to 1909, and here's just a few of them. National Forest and Wildlife. He created the U.S. Forest Service in 1905 and established 150 national forests. I think that's pretty sweet. I mean, we're still reaping the benefit of that right now from what he created. Wildlife refuges. He created the first federal bird reservation at Pelican Island in Florida in 1903 and launched the National Wildlife Refuge System. So that's some of this is coming back to him. An Equities Act in 1906. He used this to protect 18 national monuments, including the Grand Canyon in Muir Woods. We'll talk a little bit about John Muir here in a second. In national parks, he established 5 national parks, including Crater Lake, Oregon, and Wind Cave, South Dakota. Wind Cave, South Dakota. In conservation commissions, he established commissions to study natural resource management. It goes on. Legacy and philosophy, like public lands. Roosevelt believed the right of public to natural resources outweighed public rights. So if you own public land, or if you wanted to buy public land for private use, he was like, public. It's the public. The public has rights to land, and not the private. And granted, we know that there's a ton of private land out there as well too. But and again, our BLM land right now is obviously always being challenged to be taken over, and a lot of these things that Teddy Roosevelt worked really, really hard under his administration, early 1900s, to protect and to lock in so that it can't be screwed with ever before. He was an avid hunter. I don't know how that would look upon himself. I don't know how that would look today. I don't know, like if we had, there are a few people out there that, like Jim Shockey would be one of them. I mean, he's just one. He's more of a TV personality. There's some modern day hunters. I don't know if it was to the extreme of like what he did, but I don't know how that would be. He was really big into hunting. And a lot of times back in the day too, like the museums that we have in the United States were just kind of starting to get created. They were just starting to, like, these museums and like bringing specimens and species back to these museums to educate people and the general public on some of these animals that were out and about. Teddy Roosevelt was part of that. Like he did a lot of different excursions and stuff where he would go hunting, but he would also collect a lot of these specimens and species and bring them back. Some of it was really, really good. Obviously, some of it inspired other hunters to go and try to seek out these animals and almost run them into extinction, to be extinct. So maybe not so good, but that's just how a lot of it had to do with back in the day. And there's a really good book out there too to mention. Theodore Roosevelt's children, after TR passed away. He had a son by the name of Theodore Roosevelt Jr., and then he had another son named Kermit, just like Kermit the Frog. They went on an expedition over in Southeast Asia to seek out the elusive panda bear. And so I won't go into any further detail on that, but that's a pretty interesting read as well, as far as how long that expedition took and did they ever find the panda bear. The panda bear was an animal that was like an alien, basically, right? There was only a few known species or sightings of this bear, and there's a really, really good book about their expedition, the sons of TR, that went on an expedition to seek out the panda bear in Southeast Asia. That would be an interesting read of some sort. So, he ran for so he was president. He ran for a second. So he took a term off, and then he decided he wanted to get back into politics. So he ran for a second presidency, and ended up losing, right? And instead of being like, well, I guess this isn't going to work anymore, I'm done with my political career, he decides I'm gonna take another expedition, right? So he decides that after losing the second term of this presidency, I'm going to take my son and we're going to go down with this whole group of people. We're going to go down to South America and we're going to float down the river of doubt, which is down in South America. Ends up being a terrible expedition for this guy and for the whole crew. They lose a couple people. They get some canoes hung up in the river system. TR ends up going to try to get these canoes unhooked, cuts his leg open, ends up getting an infection where he gets a terrible fever, almost dies, tells his son basically, leave me here, I'm not going to make it. They don't. He ends up surviving it. But again, like, this is a long, like, he's been alive for quite some time here, and this guy is still giving her, right? Still giving her hard. He used to box when he was the president. The other story is that he used to box. What does this have to do with leadership? Not a whole lot. It's just interesting, but he used to, still in his 50s, he used to box as the president, and he would have like little competition fights until some Army artillery officer got into a boxing match with him and cut him with a right hook and blinded him in one of his eyes. And he joked and said, well, I guess my boxing days are done, and ended up taking up jujitsu. I didn't even know obviously jujitsu's been around for a long time, but this is just the kind of guy that he was. So, but just a phenomenal leader, right? And so just to tie this back in to kind of close things out. So he ends up getting hooked up with somebody that in Wisconsin we're familiar with, and that's John Muir, with all the conservation things that John Muir's done. And John Muir, he moved to Wisconsin when he was 11 years old with his family, and they lived, and eventually they ended up settling in the Portage, Wisconsin area, which from the central part is not that far. And that's really where his conservation started, really, to his impact and his love for conserving areas that he thought were beautiful, that need to be maintained and retained the same way. That's where John Muir really kind of started. And so eventually, as John Muir got older, he decided to travel. So he walked from Wisconsin down to the Gulf of Mexico and checked that out. And then he went to South America, and then he came around the Cape. And then he ended up settling in California, where then he fell in love with the Yosemite, well, now as we know it, the Yosemite National Park. It was the Yosemite Valley at the time where all the huge sequoias are. And during the time that President Roosevelt was the president, John Muir invited TR, hey, come camp with me for 3 days. I want to show you how wonderful this land is here, how unique it is with these very, very old trees and just rock face cliffs. And if you've ever been out to Yosemite National Park, it's amazing. It's an amazing area. Stationed out there for 4 years, and we used to go up there all the time. But so Teddy Roosevelt, John Muir, they end up doing a 3-day camping trip, the two of them. And there's a really, really famous picture, and I'll put it up here in the podcast, of them, where John Muir says that we need to federally protect this land. We need to conserve this. This is something that we need to be safe for generations. And Theodore Roosevelt decides, I agree with you. And they go ahead and they make the Yosemite Sequoia National Park. And so it's really, really cool. John Muir goes on to found the Sierra Club in 1892. They founded the Sierra Club. It was an influential conservation organization in the United States, and it served its first president, right, which was John Muir. John Muir actually stayed on as president until his death. But just, extraordinary life, well lived. And there's more to talk about with John Muir. I don't have enough time, but I wanted to make that correlation and that connection about, sometimes being a leader doesn't mean, again, that you have to be in a political office, or you have to be a football coach, or you have to be in a position with a title, or whatever the case may be. Some of these people are just stepping up saying, hey, you know what? We need to do something to preserve and protect. And if that one person, like a John Muir, didn't stand up and do those kinds of things, where would we be today? So never be afraid to stand up and do what's right. Volunteer. Being a leader sometimes is not always the popular thing. You're not, if you're trying to be a leader because you're trying to win some kind of popularity contest, you're doing it for the wrong reason. Do it for the right reason and what you believe in. And again, people will follow you if you believe in what you're trying to lead them with, right? And that's kind of the whole premise behind this whole conversation. It's not easy, but as I always say, and I've said this to my kids for forever and a day, anything in life that's worth it is going to be hard. Believe me, that is the honest to God truth. It's going to be hard no matter what it is, if it's worth it. And again, like I said in episode 1, I like to celebrate people that have been successful, that have worked their tail off to be successful. I hope at some point people can realize that our own human fault is that we tend to want to judge more instead of celebrate more. And I think we should be, as I get older, I want to try to celebrate more than I want to judge. So I think that kind of wraps it up. Hopefully I wasn't all over the map. I wanted to give you some instances of leadership and not go down too far down the rabbit hole, and just know that, again, like, not everybody can be a leader. We need followers just as much as we need leaders. And followers can become leaders over time, because that's like the base value of how you become that, right? And you can always learn something from bad leaders as well. Don't forget that as well. So always take note, and always remember, as a leader, people are always watching you. As a leader, you're always being watched. What's your mannerism like? What do you say? What's your appearance like? You're going to be under more scrutiny as a leader than you are if you're not. And just remember that. So hopefully you got something out of this. I appreciate it. Let me sit here and just, I think this went a lot better than the first time I shot this. And I really appreciate it. Again, trying hard. It takes a lot of time to do this stuff. But I think it's going to be worth it. And I'm looking forward to having some guests. I think I've already had a few people reach out to me and say, hey, I'd be interested in being on the podcast. I think it'd be really, really great. It'd be really good value. And I think people would really enjoy some of the things that we're proposing to talk about. It's not going to be just by me here talking the whole time. But hopefully you're getting something out of it. I appreciate it. We're going to get this out on YouTube so people can listen to it. I'm still working on getting it uploaded into a podcast platform as well. There's so many different fees and different things that, like, I don't know. It's quite the investment, let me tell you that. So, all right. Well, I appreciate you guys following along on the Fall Line Public Podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. It should come out sometime next week. And we'll figure out what we're going to talk about at that point. We'll go from there. All right. Really appreciate you. You guys have a good one. Take care.